I'm a pro, and I'm going to take the questions. Unfortunately, a couple of people have asked questions, which are ones I was going to ask you anyway. But I am going to take up just one last bit of time with you, because I'm really interested in this question about the relationship between crisis and change. And my analysis, looking at these historical examples, why did World War II lead to the tragedy of the 30s and 40s, World War I? Why did World War II lead to 30 years of relative equality, of growing welfare state, productivity, rising family incomes, a reasonably consensual politics? Why did we come out of the AIDS tragedy with the gay community taking responsibility for its behavior and feeling much more united? Treatment, investment in treatment, which ultimately led to HIV not being a terminal condition anymore, and the path being laid to the liberation of LGBT community and changes in legislation. Whereas we came out of 2007-8 thinking it would lead to change, and things just got worse, right? So I'm interested in this. And my suggestion to you is that there are three conditions that determine whether or not it is that crisis is most likely to lead to change. The first is there needs to be demand and capacity for change before the crisis. So the change doesn't just come from nowhere in the crisis. There's demand and capacity before. Secondly, in the crisis, as you've said, the demand gets increased. People want, they see that the argument gets stronger, but also in elements of the response to the crisis, the attitudes, the actions, the innovations, you see the future prefigured. There are things that we do in the crisis that hint at the possibility of change. And then thirdly, and critically, as you emerge from change, there are the political coalitions and the practical policy suggestions to take advantage of that period of time when people are up for change, willing even to imagine making sacrifices to achieve change. Now, the reason I'm asking that long-winded question is it seems to me that the hardest part of that is actually political coalitions, and particularly on the left. Because, I'm part of that camp that you weigh into very eloquently, and I accept many of the criticisms in your book. And I'd argue one of the reasons why progressives did not win the argument after 2007-8 was that you had incumbent liberal and social democratic parties trying their best to cope with that crisis and having to make compromises. And then you had a radical left of the 1% movement and Occupy with enormous power, but possibly not the kind of practical program. And in that kind of split, the opening was created that was exploited. So are you hopeful, as we emerge from this crisis, that we can unite the different strands of progressivism? Because it seems to me that's critical as to whether or not we come out in the path that you want rather than the path that you fear.
Yeah, it's a great question. To go to your list of three, I think the first thing has certainly been satisfied. I think there was absolutely a kind of pre-existing language in the United States. You saw it in the first Bernie Sanders campaign and the second one. You saw it in kind of Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez being kind of by far the most consequential new member of Congress in, a generation, if not longer, changing the language and discourse of this country within months of taking office. The second and third are harder. And I will say, I say this is a criticism that I think actually contains a lot of hope. I don't think the progressive movement has hit its ceiling. In this, I think there's a lot more room to grow. And that's the nice way to say it. I think the more critical way to say it is, I think the people who want to do a lot of the things that I'm talking about in politics in the United States, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, Jeremy Corbyn in the UK in the last couple of years, I think have been quite limited figures electorally, to be honest. I think if you are up against the power structure as much as they are, if you really want to, Bernie doesn't want to just, Bernie's policy ideas are almost secondary to the fact that Bernie wants the United States to become a different culture, right? He wants money to be less on everyone's mind. I think he's correct, but that is a lift. That is a real lift. And if you want to do that, you have to be firing on every political cylinder. Right? You can't just have the policy ideas. You can't just have the plans. You can't just appeal to kind of more educated people the way Elizabeth Warren did. You can't just be a kind of angry movement the way, a lot of the most vocal elements around Bernie Sanders' movement were. You have to have that and be a movement of exuberance. You have to have that and be a movement that is evangelical in its expansion and persuasion. You have to have that core and constantly be conquering new territory. And I don't know if it would be different in the UK, but in particular in America, you know, there is a 25 or 30% ceiling on the progressive ideas if they are framed in this kind of lefty social justice language. But to me, the framing is the constraint. Like healthcare for all is an idea without limit in its possibility. But, you know, a certain way of framing it that's bashing insurance by the way, a bashing that I fully agree with and fully on board with. But that approach, frankly, sounding like I sometimes sound, is something with, if you're running for office, you're going to have a passionate minority with you, right? The question is, and a lot of people thinking about, working for Bernie Sanders, who I reported on for Time last year, were thinking very hard about this question. Where's the next 10% come from? Right? Where's the next 10% after that come from? And each of those next 10% was going to be people more skeptical about your core message. People who maybe didn't even like you, right? You got to remember, Barack Obama won a tremendous number of racist white people. Just think about that, right? There were all these reports in the time, people doing phone banking for Obama in 2007, 2008. And the people on the call, right, rural areas of the country, white voters, would be like, yeah, I'm voting for the N-word. Think about that for a second. Barack Obama won a lot of people who hate black people, who use the N-word. That is the mark of someone who is so damn good at politics that they're just electrifying people, even people who hate them. Okay? I don't think the progressive cause has had that, right? I don't think it's been able to, for this movement to be successful, you need to have people who say, I hate socialism, I'm a proud capitalist, I'm a business owner, but that guy makes me feel something, or that woman makes me feel something, and I'm going to walk to the end of the earth with them. That's politics, particularly if the lift is the lift that the progressives need to achieve. And so one of the things I spoke of during the campaign is there's two missing languages in the United States, at least that I find in the progressive movement. One is the language of patriotism. The second is the language of personal transformation. Patriotism. You want to sell healthcare for all. It's not only a justice issue. It's not only a human rights issue. You don't have to sound like a leftist exclusively. Talk about the idea that we're a country that has each other's backs. We're a country that sent soldiers to Europe, and when one of those soldiers died in the battlefield, the others ran back 1,000 yards on Normandy to pick him up and make sure that some new bride in Indiana didn't have to wonder the rest of her life what happened to her husband, right? We're that country. And say that country is not going to see people dying of cancer or pneumonia because they didn't have health insurance in this country, right? Say it like that. Same policy, right? But now you're invoking deep values that a lot of people share and going beyond an ideology that, frankly, many, many people don't share. Second, and kind of almost at the opposite end of the spectrum, personal transformation, right? You think about in the United States, maybe to a lesser extent over there, the grocery store, the magazines at the end when you check out, what are 90% of them now are basically like personal transformation, right? Eat this weird superfood, lose 30 pounds in 7 hours or whatever. And before and after pictures, pants out to here, change your life, change your marriage, spice up your sex life, all of that, right? Okay. The magazines are telling you that's how people think. That's what people want. People want to know how their life can be different easily. Well, you know what is the ultimate personal makeover? Really good public policy, right? So speak to people in that language. Universal health care is going to do more for you than any of those magazines, but no one's telling you that. No one is telling you that your marriage will be better when you're not stressed about retirement, medical bills, and your children's education costs. Explain to people that, if you in the United States did not have to worry about losing your health care if you lose your job or quit your job, what businesses would you start? And to go even deeper, who would you be in your life if you weren't a person who had to be afraid of losing your health care? Who would you be? And the progressives I see don't know how to talk in these languages. They talk in a certain language that has done a fabulous job of winning that 25 or 30%, right? But I have spent a lot of time reporting on that remaining 70 to 75%. Many of whom I think are susceptible to these pitches, but you got to change the language. You got to change the framing. You got to speak to deeper values that actually are quite universal.
What a brilliant an answer, Anand. So look, we've got loads of questions.